So we'll be winding up in an hour. So basically it is 2:30 over there. What's the time?
2:30. 2:30 India
2:30.
time, yeah.
So yeah, by 3:30 we'll wind up, right? No, 3:30, May, sorry. Questions will take another 15 minutes, I guess. So 3:15.
We are live.
Okay.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Esteemed speaker and distinguished members of the audience, my name is Aisha Ahmed and I'm honored to welcome you all on behalf of Al-Fadel Academy. Al-Fadel Academy, born from a vision steeped in dedication and piety, stands as a beacon of light for the Ummah. It was conceived with the noble intention of providing the Muslim community with a collection of profound programs and workshops that resonate deeply with the soul. Through these endeavors, participants are inspired to dedicate themselves wholeheartedly to seeking the pleasure and approval of Allah. At Al-Fadel Academy, we understand that the journey towards self-improvement is a dynamic and lifelong journey. Hence, our offerings are diverse and cater to a wider range of interests and needs within the community. Whether it be through in-depth Quranic studies, heartwarming discussions on the prophetic traditions, or practical workshops on Islamic ethics, our programs are tailored to meet you at your point of need. We invite you to connect with us through our various platforms. On our Instagram page, you will find a treasure trove of inspirational content, including reflections, quotes, and glimpses into the transformative experiences of our participants. To explore our comprehensive list of programs and workshops, kindly visit the provided link on YouTube chat for your ease, along with the WhatsApp link where you can engage with us and our audience. Currently, we are on day 2, with this being our 4th session of this gathering, Surviving or Thriving, Embracing Mental Wellness Conference, which is an attempt to be dedicated to the vital intersection of Islamic teachings and mental health. In these unprecedented times, where the challenges to our emotional and psychological well-being are more pronounced than ever, it is crucial that we come together to explore the wisdom of our faith and its application in the realm of mental health. We gather here today not only as seekers of knowledge, but as compassionate caretakers of the hearts and minds entrusted to us by Allah. Our mission here is not only to understand the struggles faced by individuals within our community, but to offer solace, support, and healing through the transformative power of Islamic teachings. As we engage in these discussions today, dear audience, let us remember that our pursuit of knowledge and our dedication to mental health advocacy are acts of worship, in service to Allah and in compassion of His creation. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an immense privilege to introduce our distinguished speaker with us today, Zulekha Rajani, who is a highly qualified and experienced counselor and therapist with nearly a decade of dedicated service in the field of experiential training, value-based moral education, faith education, counseling, and mentoring. Zulekha's passion lies in teaching positive psychology to youth, a mission she fulfills through a series of impactful workshops held across major cities in India, including Bangalore, Delhi, Cochin, and Mumbai. She has also conducted an outstation camp for girls in Tamil Nadu, demonstrating her commitment to reaching diverse groups of young individuals. Currently, Zulekha serves as a counseling psychologist at the esteemed Mind and Brain Hospital and spearheads the Counselling Cell at a prominent school in Bangalore. In her role, she is set to embark on the establishment of a mental health lab and an Islamic Psychology department at the hospital, a testament to her innovative and forward-thinking approach to psychological well-being. Zulekha is a prolific writer on the subject of mental health and well-being. Her insightful articles have graced platforms as the Quint, the Scroll, the Cognate, Maktoob Media, and the International Open University Magazine, showing her dedication to disseminating knowledge in accessible and relatable formats. Moreover, Zulekha leads the Indian chapter of the International Students of Islamic Psychology, an organization spanning more than 90 countries dedicated to upholding the legacy of Dr. Malik Badri in the field of Islamic psychology. She is also on her journey towards attaining ijaza in the field of Islamic psychology from the esteemed Cambridge Muslim College. In her role as task force facilitator for Rafiq counseling, Zulekha brings together practitioners, psychiatrists, psychologists, and Muslim chaplains from around the world, creating a collaborative platform for the advancement of mental health support. For today, Zulekha will speak to us on Islamic psychology, which is going back in time. So the roots of Islamic psychology, they run deep, intertwining ancient Islamic philosophy, early medical advancement, and profound insights into the human psyche. A very, very interesting topic, and I would like all of you to join me in extending a warm welcome to Zulekha. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Sister Zulekha.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alhamdulillah, we are glad to have you with us, and we cannot wait to hear from you.
Alhamdulillah, I think the love and respect is mutual. Can't wait to get started and see where going back in time takes us, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Right, so Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي امري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم لا تدع لنا في مقامنا هذا ذنبا الا غفرته ولا حملا الا فرجته ولا قربا الا نفسته ولا دينا الا قضيته ولا مريدا الا شفيته ولا مريدا الا شفيته ولا مريدا الا شفيته ولا مبتلا الا عافيته ولا ضالا الا هديته ولا ضالا الا هديته ولا ضالا الا هديته ولا ولدا الا اصلحته ولا شهيدا الا تقبلته ولا حاجة من حوائج الدنيا والاخرة هي لنا فيها صلاة إلا انتهى قضائها واستمتع برحمة يا رب الرحيم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, as the topic suggests, Islamic psychology going back in time, we will be exploring some of the major stakeholders in Islamic psychology. As such, we know that the field in itself was not called Islamic psychology, it was called Ilmun Nafs. And as we also see that the classification of Islamic sciences, we have theology, we have fiqh, and we have tazkiyah. Somehow, alhamdulillah, there's a lot that's been done in the field of theology, there's a lot that's been done in the field of fiqh, and tazkiyah for some time did not, I would not say it was forgotten, but I would say that it did not really, tazkiyah as a field did not really meet the same kind of an importance as compared to fiqh and theology, because we did see that tazkiyah, which talks more about purification of the heart towards helping one understand themselves, helping one work with their own vices, we see that it did not gain much of a momentum until the 1950s or 60s. So, but if you go back into the past, a lot of scholars have been ardently writing on it, and tazkiyah was seen as a very integral part of a person's journey towards growth and progress, because until you've really worked on yourself, you really won't be able to make much of an understanding of your true meaning and your true purpose in life. So it is very important to work on the vices and aim towards moving towards the virtues. So alhamdulillah, now that we understand, and as we saw like how Dr. Malik Badri gave dawah in his book, the dilemma of a Muslim psychologist, he spoke about the dilemma that a Muslim psychologist go through, where and just like how it started off from the paper, the lizard's hole, like have we entered the lizard's hole, we had come to a point where secular psychology had started to gain more importance, modern subjectivity, understanding that how Islamic psychology was not really, or say even psychology was not really understood in the way that it should have been understood. The mind and the body were seen as two different elements as compared to seeing them as a holistic being together that are interdependent and interconnected. So we'll see how the scholars in the past have given, not just spoken about it, not just theorized, but even in their practice, even in their when they used to meet people, when they used to give nasiya, or whether they used to write, or whether they used to see patients and clients, they would make sure that they would educate them, help them to understand their own selves a lot, as compared to focusing on their theology and fiqh. So the scholars in the past definitely gave a lot of importance. That's why they were called polymath. They helped people to not just understand theology, fiqh, but also tazkiyah, and help people to embrace all the classifications of the Islamic sciences, so it could move into an epistemology and ontology of the field as such, towards a holistic way of understanding the self and the world around. So, alhamdulillah, in the 2 days, there was so much that was covered. So I won't be going into the definitions or moving into what Islamic psychology is or its entire timeline. I'll be focusing more on the works of these 6 prominent, as now we call them, Islamic psychologists. But of course, they were just polymath, they were scholars, they were doctors of their times, they were spiritual doctors of their times, right? So in Islam, we see that the act of aiding others is not only encouraged, but it's also regarded as noble. And as such, this ayah which talks about, this hadith that talks about when you're helping out somebody, when you're trying to help somebody and you're taking off their hardship, it is Allah will help you, Allah will take away the hardships that could be placed on you on the day of resurrection. So that becomes an inspiration that the work that we're doing is very sacred, it's very divine, and we really need to have ikhlas, have true sincerity in the kind of efforts that we're taking towards the holistic healing, the holistic being and wellness and understanding, helping people understand themselves in a holistic way. So the work in itself is very sacred. So that sacredness, which has been passed from centuries, from great scholars to us, it's now the time for us to carry forward the legacy in a way that it truly deserves. Mental health care, as we know, in the golden age of Islam was unique. There was a lot of awareness about it. There were treatments planned related to it. There was maristans, there were psychiatric hospitals. I mean, it's so amazing to know that it was our legacy that the first Islamic psychiatric hospitals came about. And now that we, alhamdulillah, are talking about Islamic psychology, it's definitely something that we understand that it's not just the now, but then it's been a great legacy. It's been a great journey, because back in 705 in Baghdad came about the first psychiatric hospital, right? And subhanAllah, then it went to Cairo, and alhamdulillah, the maristans, as we know, as Dr. Rania's work would stand and attest to it so beautifully, the maristans or bimaristans, the places where people who are sick used to seek help. It's so beautiful to understand that it was the Muslim legacy that these hospitals were constructed, even the way in which they were placed in the city, like they were placed right at the start of the city or in the middle of the city, so that people visit the sick, right? Because there's so many rewards attached to visiting the sick, alhamdulillah. And there is a French philosopher who wrote a letter to his country saying that the food is so clean, and I mean the food is so good and nutritious, the air is so good, the clothes are so good, and he in fact said that everything is so nutritious and everybody comes to visit him, see him. And I think he even writes back saying that I don't feel like leaving this place. That's how amazing. So that's our legacy. That's something that we need to re-imbibe, reinvent, revive to some sort and degrees, because alhamdulillah, I mean, we feel that science and Islam, a lot of people think that, it's the medical treatments and everything is not something that Islam believes in. But this shows that along with medical treatments, the counseling part or the spiritual part, they saw human beings holistic. So just how the body needs medicine, sometimes the soul needs spiritual care, and the psychological, your mind needs therapeutic help. So they saw human beings as holistic, and this is something as a lesson that we all need to go back to. And as we know, this entire era saw a lot of advancements in terms of studying the mind, the hospitals, wide range of Islamic physicians who spoke about different processes, understood depression, understood phobias, understood OCDs. And we think it's all a construct of now the ICDs and DSMs. It's the construction of the 21st century or 20th century. But subhanAllah, if you go back and we see to the rich legacy that our predecessors can attest to, and their work and their books, we see that it's nothing, we're just reinventing the wheel, but much of the work has been already done by them, alhamdulillah. So let's start with Al-Kindi. As an Islamic psychologist, we know that Al-Kindi was a pioneer in experimental psychology. So all of these different psychologists have different accolades to them. Like some, if you see Al-Farabi, he was a social psychologist. Al-Kindi is an experimental psychologist. Abu Zaid al-Balkhi, as we'll see him coming up in the next few slides, he defined the DSM, the 4 major categories of neurosis, right? So alhamdulillah, all of their work was so important. We see that how he used the first method of experimentations using sensations, right? So using the sensations and perceptions to appropriately understand stimulus and the responses. So alhamdulillah, he was an experimental psychologist. And in today's times, what do we know of experimental psychology? William Wundt in the 19th century, in the early 1900s is when he came up with the first experimental lab. But subhanallah, this is going back way to 803, his lifetime, right? So alhamdulillah, it makes us truly proud, and at the same time, it inspires us to continue their legacy. So he was also one of the earliest to realize the therapeutic value of art forms. In fact, there's an incident that says that he used different forms of movements, different forms of sounds in order to help cure a person who was quadriplegic. So all these incidents in various books helps us to understand how they used alternative theories and alternative methods of treatment instead of being very unilaterally focused and looking at a problem only in one way. We also know of him and his different books that he wrote, which is Sleeps and Dreams. As we know, dreams play a very important part in Islam. Very similar to how we have subjective tests like the TAT or Rorschach, which brings about a lot of, and even if you see Sigmund Freud or Carl Jung, all of these famous secular psychologists have given a lot of importance to dreams. Right, so we see how he wrote an entire treatise on sleeps and dreams, a treatise on dream interpretation. He also wrote on first philosophy and eradication of sorrow. In the latter, he described sorrow as a spiritual nafsani grief. Which is caused by the loss of loved ones or personal belongings, or by failure in obtaining what one lusts after. So different psychologists of those times have defined sadness, defined obsessions, define phobias differently. So as per him, it was when you set your heart towards something and you're not able to get it, the failure of obtaining something, or when your heart is going through a grief or loss is when sadness actually occurs. So if it causes pain, then the cures come. So and he also said that if you can discern the pain, if you can understand how the pain is different from the other, or if you're able to break them down into different areas, then the cures can be found easily. Just like how in secular psychology today, we call the differential diagnosis or differential diagnostic criteria. That's how we understand how he saw that if you're able to discern the pains or discern the symptoms, then the cure could be found easily. He also recommended that if we do not tolerate losing or dislike being deprived of what is dear to us, then we should seek after the riches in the world of the intellect. So basically, as today they say distraction therapy, or putting your heart, like just like how we have resist as a technique, right, where you actually focus on something else or someone else apart from yourself when you're going through intense emotions. Here also it was like, if you're not able to tolerate losing or feeling deprived, then you actually focus on the riches of the intellectual world, because that's something that will always keep you going forward, and there is no end and stop to that, right? Because the more you know, the more you understand how much you don't know. So alhamdulillah, all these strategies and all these mechanisms, if we see, are so healthy, alhamdulillah. Right now, we are living in a world where everybody is suggesting things like, you only live once, do what your heart feels like, chase after whatever your heart desires and the urges, as compared to the entire rich legacy that we go back to as to how they directed people towards higher purpose, higher causes, alhamdulillah. So each and every suggestion, each and every strategy, or each and every anything that they put across for us is something that we see as something of great value, which we are not able to get in today's times, right? So he also stated that sorrow is not within us, but we bring it upon ourselves. Because how do we understand this? There are two people who lose the same thing, but one is clearly depressed and the other person is able to, like, maybe he's upset for some time and then he's able to come out of it. So sadness and sorrow is something that we dawn upon ourselves, because the situation is the same, right? How a person lingers into it, processes it, and holds it is what takes into sorrow, and it makes into, like, lingering sorrow, which turns into depression. He also developed cognitive methods to combat depression, and he discussed the intellectual operations of human beings. So coming up next is Abu Zaid al-Balkhi, one of the most prominent physician and psychologist to have passed. He was born in 1850 in Balkh, Khorasan, in modern-day Afghanistan, and he wrote this medical and psychological work, Masahil al-Abdan wa al-Anfus, Sustenance of the Body and the Soul. And this was, again, alhamdulillah, Dr. Malik Badri, he translated it. And even Dr. Rania Abad was, this was discovered in Hagia Sophia Library. So alhamdulillah, there's a beautiful story of how this book was discovered. So you should just go and read how this, book came about, and Dr. Rania's entire story about how she, took it back to her professors at Stanford, and they asked, the translation and all the work that came after that, alhamdulillah. So you should totally go check out the entire beautiful story of this book. So mental health and mental illness. So as we see in this book, in Islamic psychology, we understand the concepts of mental health. But imagine Abu Zaid al-Balkhi spoke about mental hygiene. Just like how we have the physical hygiene, mental hygiene as a concept is something that Abu Zaid al-Balkhi talks in this book. And he often related it to spiritual health. In this book, he also talks about, he talks about how the diseases are related to both the body and the soul. So this entire chapter, which talks about mental illnesses, so there are different chapters. Only the mental health, this book is only like just a quarter of what the entire book is like. But otherwise, there are different chapters on physical health, and which alhamdulillah, of course, will one should read if they really want to. But I think this entire chapter on the sustenance of the body of the soul, where it talks about the mental health, I think that's definitely a must read. So he used the term al-tib al-ruhani to describe spiritual and psychological health, and the term tib al-qalb to describe the mental medicine. And in fact, he criticized many medical doctors in his time for placing too much emphasis on physical illnesses and neglecting the psychological or mental illnesses of patients. And he argued that since man's construction is from both the body and the soul, therefore human existence cannot be without ishtibah, which is nothing but inwavering or entangling, without the two coming in contact in a way that they're both working or they work together, right? So there was this Cartesian split. As you see, even few centuries back, a lot of people spoke that the mind and the head is a separate agency as compared to the body. They never saw a connection between the two. But more and more research and more scientific data prove that there is nothing called a dual Cartesian split. So Alhamdulillah, back in the 9th century, there he is talking about how it's, the human existence is not in split, but it's together. It's, it's together. He was also the first to differentiate between neurosis and psychosis. So our entire medical, psychological, psychiatric industry, subhanAllah, he just gave those two divisions back in the 9th century. So he, in fact, classified, further went on, not just divided them into neurosis and psychosis, but he went ahead to, in fact, even put them into different categories like fear and anxiety, anger and aggression, sadness and depression, and obsessions. And he further classified 3 types of depression. So normal depression or sadness, which is huzn, endogenous depression, which is originating from the body, and reactive clinical depression originating from outside the body. It's endogenous and exogenous depression. He also wrote that a healthy individual should always keep healthy thoughts and feelings. So this is very nice. So he spoke about a first aid. He spoke about a first aid where, just like how we have a first aid box when, you just have it just in case. So when you're going out on a picnic or when you're, in your car or something, you just have a first aid book because you don't know when you may need it and when there would actually be a need for an emergency where you need to just take out the box and, help somebody have the first aid, right? Similarly, he spoke about having thoughts and feelings that could serve the same purpose. So if in case you're going to be having an emotional outburst, then you have certain places, certain thought processes that you can actually go back to, which will help you to maybe calm down, and which will help you to be more in the present and be more grateful and not go into that urge of that entire outburst or what needs to, how you really would want to react otherwise. A good example for this, so we do use this into a guided visualization practice called the place of refuge, where when a person is feeling very there's a lot of anxiety and the person is just very socially overwhelmed. So you use this more in social anxiety situations, and you use it in situations like when they're having extreme anxiety around exams or presentations or something. So what you help them do is you rather create a place of refuge for them. So, it's done through a guided visualization once and twice, where they're more in sync with their breath, with their body sensations, and they actually travel to a place, whichever place that makes them feel more comfortable. Some people go back to their grandmother's lap because that's one of the place of comforts that they have, which they miss. Some people go back to their backyard. Some people go back to the ocean that they had once visited as a child, or when they were on a vacation. So they go back and they just sit there and remember Allah in that visualization and the meditation, and then they come back. So they calm, they feel that sense of calm because they just travel to another place and they just come back. So these are all strategies that are actually woven now in therapy, where you're having some places or good thoughts as a first aid medicine. And whenever you are going through a tough time, then you actually have those thoughts help you instead of actually going into the entire outburst or urge or anger or go into that zone of sadness and depression. So he also stated that balance between the body and the mind is required for good health, and that an imbalance between the two can cause sickness. So the entire concept of homeostasis that we talk about now, where everything needs to be in sync, everything needs to be balanced, or even the mizaj concept of the mizaj, the four temperaments, the melancholic, the choleric, the sanguine, and the phlegmatic. The more balanced we are in terms of our temperament, because Prophet ﷺ is seen as the ultimate balanced mizaj, the balanced personality, right? Whereas, as we know, Umar radiallahu anhu, and the ones like, alhamdulillah, the Islamic sciences of temperaments, when you see, that he was more choleric in nature, right? He had like, a sense of that, his Faroukness, his discretion from right and wrong, alhamdulillah. So, but everything, be it your personality, be it your temperament, I mean, the personality and temperament, so be it your health, or be it your, your time, like, how you balance things out, and you're not giving too much for maybe work and too little for your family, or vice versa, and like, balancing things. Everything needs to be in a state of balance, right? Just like how the entire universe is in a state of balance, alhamdulillah. So he spoke about how the body and the mind needs to be in a good state of balance. Otherwise, what happens is there is sickness, right? So he also spoke about reciprocal inhibition, which was something that Joseph Wolf actually spoke about in the 1969. So we see how there's a constant pattern of the concepts that were discovered so late, having had a mention in these early texts, verbatim sometimes, or sometimes even with a better language or better use of words and better examples, alhamdulillah. He was also a pioneer in psychotherapy, as we know, and psychophysiology and psychosomatic medications. He recognized that a body and a soul can be healthy or sick, or balanced or imbalanced, right? So this understanding was very key in helping understand that the body, just like how the body can fall sick, similarly, even your psychological self can feel sick. And he goes on to say that imbalance of the body can create fever, headache, and other physical illness, while imbalance of the soul can result in anger, anxiety, sadness, and other mental symptoms. So alhamdulillah, the kind of examples that he used, or the kind of, but I remember Dr. Rania telling this to us, and we were actually, like, we were all amazed that Abu Zaid al-Balkhi, although his writings are so profound, she said that he wasn't really seeing clients, like he wasn't really working with people, so he was more of a academic academic doctor, academic writer, and academic person who would work. So I think, and that's when the entire discussion in our class had happened, where we spoke about how he must have been a very good observer, that he captured so many symptoms so well, from neurosis to psychosis. He captured so many disorders so well. So it's said that from whatever little of his life is known, that he never really saw many clients, or he never really was a practicing doctor as compared to the others. And yet, alhamdulillah, such a beautiful audacity to have, that he actually condemned the other doctors, that you're only focusing a lot on mental health as compared to physical. You're focusing a lot on physical health, and you're not focusing much on the mental health of the patients. He further argued that if the body gets sick, the nerves loses much of its cognitive and comprehensive ability, and fails to enjoy the desirous aspects of life, and that if the nafs gets sick, the body may also find no joy in life. So eventually the results, that's why it's so important to go back to the core. So when today morning, when I and Saima were having a discussion on the case studies, we were on and on pointing out how we need to go back to the core. Because although the result looks the same, that there is no enjoyment in life on the things that you used to like to do earlier on, anhedonia feeling, where everything starts feeling more like meaningless, and everything starts looking absurd, and like when you're losing that motivation to live, like losing, like everything that used to hold dear to you starts losing its meaning and sense, and there's like, be it the chores or be it something that you used to love doing, you don't see a difference, like everything looks more mundane. Although the cause could be like the results or the outcome could look the same, excuse me, the cause could be very different, right? Like it could be because sick body also, like when your body is sick, that's also when it it loses some bit of its cognitive abilities and the comprehensive, to be able to. And similarly, when your nafs is sick, that also may result into very similar outcomes. So it's very important to go back to the core as to why, what was the onset. I think the prognosis is very important here. That's why I think diagnostic statistical manual, all these ICD book, all these books where you go back to understanding a disorder, you will see prognosis mentioned so clearly. So going back to the core and the prognosis is very important. Al-Balkhi also traced back his ideas on mental health towards the Quran and Hadith attributed to Muhammad ﷺ, such as, in the heart is a disease, truly in the body there is a morsel of flesh, and when it is corrupt, the body is corrupt, and when it is sound, the body is sound. Truly it is a qalb. Verily Allah does not consider your appearance or your wealth in appraising you, but he considers your heart and your deeds. Right? So he constantly, if you see the book, he constantly brought about a lot of beautiful hadith, a lot of Quranic verses that could explain that how important heart is, how important, how important of a focus it is to look at, the diseases of the heart and put oneself through the process of tazkiyah and tadib al-akhlaq, disciplining of the self, and to cleaning the heart and so on and so forth. So all of these, alhamdulillah, is something again that we need to go back to. He recognized two types of depression, one which is caused by known reasons such as loss or failure. So there is a clear onset, as we know, people come and they say that, I lost a so-and-so loved person, or I lost so much, I lost these things, my, materialistic gains of so many years for a big bankrupt loss or something. And, so people go through loss and failure and examination losses. A lot of people come with, a lot of students come with feeling, hopeless because they've not been able to clear some exams and so on, right? So this can be treated psychologically through both external methods and internal methods, right? Such as persuasive talking, preaching, and advising. And internal methods such as developing that inner thought and conscious, igniting the cognitions, helping them to understand where it's stemming from and what are the symptoms and what are the core beliefs that accompany these kind of, symptoms. All of that really helps, right? The other causes by known reasons such as sudden affliction of sorrow and distress, which persists all the time, preventing the afflicted person from physical activity or showing any happiness or enjoying any of the pleasures, which may be caused by physiological reasons such as impurity of the blood and can be treated through physical medicine. So he spoke about not just psychological, but onset of depression, but he also spoke about as what we call today in the secular psychology as the biomedical model. So there could be seriously, they could not, it doesn't, every depression doesn't really need to have a psychological or a spiritual angle. It could be purely biomedical, where there are some endorphins or serotonins or neurofines. So all of these neurotransmitters could actually be less. So you do a good blood work and it shows up that, okay, there is, because I know a very good friend who just felt so she felt like she suddenly slipped into major depressive disorder. And when the blood work and everything came, there was serious imbalance in the hormones. So that was corrected medically and she was all fine. So alhamdulillah, that's what makes these disorders very the case history or understanding them in detail as to where and what. So we cannot skip a good diagnostician should never skip any of these factors. They should look into the medical model. They should also look into the psychological model. They should also look into the spiritual model. They should also look into the social model. If it's coming from a social, for example, the families being very rude and aggressive and the dynamics of the family, or there are children, teenagers who come who are seeing their parents getting divorced and it's a very ugly, claiming of children and possession and division. And so there is no angle that should be left out. He also wrote comparisons between physical disorders with mental disorders, and showed how psychosomatic disorders can be caused, can actually cause certain interactions between them. So that's about Abu Zaid al-Balkhi, and now we're moving into Al-Farabi. Al-Farabi, as we know, is very famous for his social psychology and the moral city, which his treatises spoke very highly about. He stated that an isolated individual cannot achieve all the perfections by himself without the aid of other individuals. And he wrote about the innate disposition of every man to join another human being or other men in labor, in work, in order to perform. So I think his theories became a very good place for people to understand organizational structure, how people work in group, how human beings are made to work in group. SubhanAllah, if we see how there's something hadith that talks about care about your neighbors and care about the society, Muslim, lives in an ummah, and there are examples of how, when one body part hurts, the entire, the one body part hurts, the entire body is, aching in pain. So how the concept of unity and ummah and everything, subhanAllah. So it's beautiful to see how all these psychologists from the past never saw anything that was coming from Islam as, they never left any aspect to connect it to the human psyche and see how we could thrive and do well there, right? So he concluded that in order to achieve what he can of that perfection, every man needs to stay in the neighborhood of others and associate with them, right? Isolation, for your spiritual purpose, yes, for some, a lot of times, a lot of psychologists have also suggested some bit of isolation, and in some cases, like when you're teaching them about attachment styles and people pleasing and boundary setting, so some bit of isolation and being okay to be by themselves is fine. But a man in general and a woman in general, a human being in general was created to live in societies, and alhamdulillah, the societies and the ummah is a great source of strength, and it's also a great source of test sometimes, right? So Allah doesn't want us to subject ourselves to just move away from everything, but rather to be and do the best to the best of our abilities within the set of the Ummah. His work on Cause of Dreams, which appeared as chapter 24 of his Book of Opinions of the People of the Ideal City, was a treatise on dreams in which he was the first to distinguish between dream interpretation and the nature of the causes of dreams. So as we see, dream is playing a recurrent role in a lot of these psychologists, alhamdulillah, a lot of their works. Ibn Sina, coming to Ibn Sina, who lived from 1980 to 1037. He was, again, like a Muslim psychologist, as we call them now, and a neuroscientist, right? Ibn Sina is also seen as a pioneer of neuropsychiatry. He first described numerous neuropsychiatric conditions, including hallucination, insomnia, mania, nightmares, melancholia. Also, he spoke about dementia, epilepsy, paralysis, stroke, vertigo, tremor. Ibn Sina was also a pioneer in psychophysiology and also in psychosomatic medicine. Ibn Sina also proposed that human beings have 7 inner senses to complement the outer senses. In the long history of psychology, this was one of the first attempts to try to understand the way that the mind and the reasoning operate together. So first, starting off with, of course, common sense, which, as with the quote goes, that is very uncommon, right? So common sense is nothing but this sense collects information gathered by external senses or external life. Then you go to retention imagination. This sense remembers the information that is gathered by common sense, right? Compositive animal imagination. This sense allows all animals, including human beings, to learn what they should avoid and what they should actively seek in their natural environment. Compositive human imagination. This sense allows humans to learn what to avoid and what to seek in the world around them. Estimated power. This is an ability to make the innate judgments about the surrounding environment and determine what is dangerous and what is beneficial. So look how he went with, and subhanAllah. So we, like a lot of people who are studying psychology would know that biological basis of behavior, sensation, perceptions. All of these are like some of the Gestalt therapy, similarity, and all of these are seen as very important chapters in social psychology, as you spoke about Ibn al-Farabi, right? All of these are seen as very important chapters or areas to understand psychology, memory and processing and perceptions and attentions and all of that. Imagine how they processed, understood, experimented, excuse me, and so they were so keen observers to understand and write using words and language towards all of these things that which took the West or the world centuries to write about or understand about or even look into that area, right? So we see memory and processing as well, which is memory, as we know, is responsible for remembering all of the information that is developed by the other senses. That's why we have an olfactory memory, right? Like I remember how my grandmother in Mumbai used to have dhania. So whenever I smell dhania, I go back to how my grandmother used to like having it, like, the seed dhania. So, I mean, all of these memories, I mean, subhanAllah, how remarkable, right? How remarkably we use memories to associate it to people and events and situations. Like some colors remind you of certain places, right? Green is so beautifully associated. Blue is associated with the skies and the oceans, and it goes back to good and bad memories. So that's how remarkable it is, right? Like how all these senses are helping us to remember certain things. Coming to processing, which is, of course, it's an ability to use all the information and is the highest of all these 7 internal senses. So this is again one of the biggest and a beautiful contribution that we see. He also recognized physiological psychology in the treatment of illnesses involving emotions, and he also developed a system for associating changes in the pulse rate. Like, subhanAllah, I mean, this is something that's now attributed to Carl Jung, another very famous secular psychologist of the times. Word association test, like the first thing that comes to your mind when there is a word, right? So you see how Ibn Sina actually used the pulse test, like how you actually can use the pulse rate with the inner feeling. He, in fact, even spoke about love sickness, and he actually treated a Japanese prince who was love-stricken. Like Ibn Sina, his reputation goes to having diagnosed the condition of a prince, right, who lay, who was sick and was like, because he was, a lot of doctors had given up, and a lot of doctors were baffled as to what is happening. But he just noticed that whenever the lover's name was mentioned, the pulse actually fluttered. So that's how he realized. And for him, the solution is as simple as uniting the sufferer with the beloved, right? So now we talk about the pulse and the word associations and everything. And subhanAllah, they were right there doing it, through, tried and tested methods, and alhamdulillah. So it just is remarkable how, there were such key observants and learners and teachers and preachers, alhamdulillah. Coming to Imam al-Ghazali, of course, I think his work in the field remains unparalleled for the kind of contribution Imam al-Ghazali's Ihya Ulumuddin and all 40 volumes have done to the field of Ilm al-Nafs. He discussed the concept of self and the causes of misery and happiness. He described the self using 4 terms: the qalb, the ruh, the nafs, and the aql, which is the same model that we and my teacher and, even Dr. Malik Badri, when he wanted to explain the concept of Islamic psychology, he actually, so it's derived, the inspiration is actually derived from Imam al-Ghazali's the ruh, which is a spirit, and the self, which is the nafs, and the mind, which is the aql, and the heart, which is the qalb, right? So this model is by Dr. Abdullah Rotman, and it talks about how the ruh is inspired by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Adam alayhi salam was bred into, right? And the nafs, because nafs has the 3 levels, nafsul ammara, lawwama, and mutma'inna, is influenced. So the lowest level of the nafs is actually influenced by the shaitan when we're actually forgetful of Allah and we give in to the tricks of shaitan, right? And here is the battleground, the munjiyat and mukhliyat, where you're struggling against the lower self and the vices. And then, your tadib al akhlaq, the refinement of the character is happening, and mukhliyat, which is purification of the self through spiritual and psychological cures. So, I mean, subhanallah, going back to his model and how then Dr. Rajat Skinner's model that came about the nafsakal, and alhamdulillah, finally, Dr. Abdullah Rotman's model, which talks about the fitra, right? It talks about how Allah's nur guides the ruh, and how if we are steep down to the lowest level of our nafs al-amara, it is shaitan that has grip over, right? So alhamdulillah, we see how even the modern discourse of Islamic psychology is, subhanallah, as we call it, so mutasir, so influenced, heavily and beautifully influenced with the work of the, all these greatest psychologists to have, passed by and gone by. So he stated that the self has an inherent yearning for an ideal, which it strives to realize, and it is endowed with qualities to help realize it. He further stated that the self has motor and sensory motives for fulfilling its body needs. He wrote about the motives and comprises. So I'll move over this fast quickly. Let's talk about the 5 internal senses that he spoke about. Again, common sense, imagination, reflection, recollection, and the memory, right? So tafakkur and tadakkur, these 2 are particularly even more important because they bring, like if you see tafakkur, this is a quality of bringing together relevant thoughts and associates to consider fit. And it's also, so it's to put oneself through a process of creating something new within the mind while looking at it from a different perspective, right? And tadakkur is to remember the outer form of objects in memory and to recollect the meaning. And of course, the memory, which is to preserve the impressions of what is received through the senses. He wrote that while the external senses occur through specific organs, the internal senses are located in different regions of the brain, and discovered that the memory is located in the hinder lobe, imagination is located in the frontal lobe. All of it is scientifically so true, subhanAllah, now when you see the different lobes and what roles they play. And reflection is located in the middle folds of the brain. He stated that these inner senses allow people to predict future and situations based on what they learned from the past experience. So some sort of an intuitive ability to understand what is good, what is wrong. If I do this, I'm going to go into the slippery slope again, right? So all of that, alhamdulillah. In the Ihya Ulumuddin, the revival of the religious sciences, he wrote that the 5 internal senses are found in both human beings and animals. In Mizan al-Amal, however, he later states that animals do not possess a well-developed reflective power, and he argues that animals mostly think in terms of pictorial ideas in a simple way and are incapable of complex associations and disassociations of abstract ideas involved in reflections. He also wrote about the self carries 2 additional qualities which distinguishes a man from the animals, enabling the man to attain spiritual perfection, which are akal and irada. Because otherwise, with animals, we know like they have an urge and the desire, they just like, when they're hungry, there is no concept of starving. But alhamdulillah, when we understand the concept of saum and the irada, the will, right, in order to fast, to stay, not have anything. So all of that, the akal and the irada are 2 distinct things that separate us from the animals. He also argued that the intellect is a fundamental rational faculty which enables man to generalize and form concepts and gain knowledge through. He also argued that human will and animal will are both different. Conditioned by the intellect, the animal will is conditioned by anger and appetite, and that all these power controls regulate the body. So for us, it is conditioned by the intellectual. So we are, intellectually seeing, okay, this food is maybe not good for me, so maybe let me wait for some more time. Maybe this is a quick food, let me just go and make something which is even more longer. For an animal, I think those things do not. So comparisons with animals and understanding ourselves, all of that notes have really, because I think even in Pavlov's, the dog, the classical conditioning and operant conditioning, the pigeon, all of the experiments, by comparing and understanding the difference between us and the animals, have given a lot of clarity as to how the conditioned response works with conditioned stimulus. Similarly, here we see that, when in order to understand ourselves, we need to understand how we are different from the animals, but also to understand how we do have some animalistic traits as well. He further writes that the culp controls and rules over them: appetite, anger, impulse, apprehension, intellect, and will. And he also talks about how human beings have all 6 of these traits, while animals only have 3: appetite, anger, and impulse. This was in contrast to other ancient and medieval thinkers such as Aristotle, Ibn Sina, Roger Bacon, and Thomas Aquinas, who all believe that animals cannot become angry. Al-Ghazali writes, he also wrote about the knowledge that can either be innate or acquired, and he derives acquired knowledge into phenomenal material world and spiritual related to God and soul. And he divided acquired knowledge into imitation, logical reasoning, contemplation, and intuition. And like I said, that he also argued that there are 4 elements in human nature, like the sage, which is very intellect and reasoning, which has a great capacity for intellectual and reasoning capacity. The pig, which is very lusty and gluttony. The dog, which is that angry and always ready to be there, out there, and just have an outburst. And the devil, which is brutality. So understanding ourselves in these areas where there's more refinement and tadib al-akhlaq needed, where there is more understanding needed, where there is more policing needed, all of that, alhamdulillah, helps us to understand. When you understand, how they understood us in different elements. He also argued that the latter 3 elements are in conflict with the former element, that is the intellect and the reasoning, because different people have different powers in proportions. He divided the nafs, as we know from the Quran itself, nafs al-ammara, lawama, and mutma'inna. Ammara is the one that is very free and is just wanting to gratify its passions and is very prone to falling for evil. Nafs al-lawama is that conscience which is trying to guide and direct us towards the right and the wrong. And Nafs al-Mutmainna is, of course, the self that reaches the ultimate peace. And that should be the aim, inshallah, for all of us. As an analogy between psychology and politics, he compared the soul to that of a king running a kingdom, arguing that the body organs are like the artisans and workers. Intellect is like a wise vizier, desire is like a wicked servant, and anger is like that of a police force. So he argues that the king can correctly run the state of the affairs by turning the wise vizier turns away from wicked servant and regulating the workers and the police. So the kind of, like, if you see it's full of analogies and examples to understand things better, and such a beautiful example, right? Like how the entire psychology of politics and everything works, like how the soul or a person, it's about a king. The king should have the right direction and the right vision and understanding. That's when all the body parts will comply and given. And the intellect is like the wise vizier. If the king is corrupt, and of course if the vizier, it's all going to be corrupted and things are not going to be the way it should, right? The soul is balanced if it keeps getting angry, under control, and makes the intellect dominate the desire. He also argued that for a soul to reach perfection, it needs to evolve through several stages. Sensuous, like a moth, which has no memory; imaginative, like a lower animal; instinctive, like a higher animal; rational, that transcends animal stage and apprehends objects beyond the scope of the senses; and of course, divine, which is apprehending the reality of spiritual things. He also stated that there are 2 types of diseases, physical and spiritual. He considered the latter to be more dangerous, which is the spiritual. because it results from ignorance and deviation from God, knowing God and understanding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he listed the spiritual diseases as self-centeredness, addiction to wealth, fame, social status, ignorance, cowardice, cruelty, lust, waswas, malevolence, clumsy, envy, deception, and greed. So all of it which we see in today's, I mean, of course, like it's always been there, but now I think it's just out there more in the open. To overcome these spiritual weaknesses, he also suggested the therapy of the opposites, which is very interesting because we use that today in secular therapy as well, where you use the imagination in pursuing the opposite, such as ignorance and learning, love and hate, right? So trying to imbibe or move towards the opposite and work towards the balance. He described the personality as integration of spiritual and bodily forces, and he believed that closeness to God is equivalent to normality, whereas distance from God leads to abnormality. So, I mean, this aspect of having that good and great sense of understanding your relationship with Allah, your connection with Him, and your, process of understanding Him and having that reliance in tawakkul, right? Because that's what will equal towards having or leading a fulfilled and a well life. Because moving away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will lead to the balance, the mizan falling off, right? The homeostasis falling off, and which could actually lead to a lot of these ailments and spiritual, ailments. Al-Ghazali argued that human beings occupy a position midway between animals and the angels, and his distinguishing quality is knowledge. So the more we raise in knowledge, the more we're able to, inshallah, transcend the level, right? So he argues that human can either rise to the level of angels with the help of knowledge or fall to the level of animals by letting his anger, lust dominate him. He also argued that ilm al-batin is fard, and advise that tazkiyatun nafs. Also, I mean, it's incumbent to go through tazkiyatun nafs, the process of cleaning one's heart and self. He also noticed that good conduct can only develop from within and does not need total destruction of natural propensities. We'll quickly run through Ashraf Ali Thani, who is the last, contributors, because all of these, alhamdulillah, were from like different parts of the world and medieval. So I want to take up somebody who's more contemporary and also from the Indian subcontinent. So Ashraf Ali Thani, as we know, he has like different accolades, physicians of the Muslims. He was called Ummad. He was also called the reformer of the masses. He was a very successful author, a jurist, a sage, and a frontier of Islamic tradition. His views are identified by 3 titles, and I particularly wanted to add him because we use a lot of Islamic psychology. We use a lot of his bibliotherapy, narrative therapy, which again sometimes very wrongly gets attributed to Western philosophers and psychologists, but subhanallah, I mean, he's been doing it all along with 140 plus treatises on Islamic psychology and ways to help people cope with different areas in life. So his views are identified by 3 titles: personality theory, causes and classes, and treatments or therapies. In personality theory, we see that Thanvi is, he says that a child is born with innocent nature and he learns good and bad things of nafs, as we know, and we've already discussed nafs al-ammara, lawama, and mutmainna. And when it comes to causes and classification of diseases, he spoke about when a human being is becoming detached from religion and is going away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it starts making him feel worthless. This also removes the distinction between good and bad. Greed and material gain becomes very important as a goal in life. And this worldly gain and greed exposes one to a lot of mental diseases. According to Maulana, there are 2 forces within the human being, constructive force and a destructive force. And he lays great emphasis on the training of a child to strike a right balance between these two forces, which is constructive and destructive. And in the early days, parents, especially the mother, plays a greater role while bringing up the child on the right lines. Wrong training spoils him, making him prone to more mental diseases. And the kind of mental disease that he spoke about is, he spoke about organic and functional disturbances or functional diseases. So the organic diseases may be cured by medicines. So again, there is a validation and understanding that medicines and tib and abdi and all of that should be used, like using of herbs and medicines is it's okay and it's fine. But of course, everything has its own, like not overdoing anything, right? Because even, there is a constant concern of the psychiatric industry being very, very, like the entire mental health is very Eurocentric. They also say it's very biomedically focused, right? So there's a lot of decolonization and a lot of unlearning that is happening with, like not looking at things only from a biocentric perspective, like from a biological perspective, but also looking at it from a very holistic way of, like, psychological, social, emotional, spiritual, and also biomedical, like biological. So the organic diseases may be cured by medicines, but the functional or psychological diseases are to be cured by individuals and group therapies. The individual therapy, in individual therapy, the disturbed individual is made to understand his own self, as a right path. He also helped a lot of people understand persons suffering from organic and functional disturbances. And he also assigned a lot of them to different responsibilities. And as we see, he actually used, like what he would actually do is he would actually ask, like, individuals to write down, like, if you see, one of his techniques is to write things down and ask them to, like in reading therapy and communication therapy, you will see that he used to ask them to write down things, like where and what and how they've been feeling, like write down all the questions and then go back to each question and answer them together. Like in reading therapy, we see that at the start of the session, he would ask the patient to, again, like write down all the problems, believing that a strong psychological link exists between the patient and the therapist, like that rapport, that strong rapport. And the association was developed through an exchange of letters. So a lot of writing, a lot of bibliotherapy and reading and, use of text was used in his therapeutic, interventions. The patient must also be very conscious of his anxiety and explain his trouble in writing, if in case he encountered. The therapist believed that some individuals needed direct guidance and counseling. After reading the content of the patient's letter or the words, he put some questions to satisfy and prepare his patients for the treatment. More often than not, he used to provide reading material out of them, to asking them to read those ayahs, or asking them to go back and read a book, or asking them to go back and read certain verses from the Quran. So, and it was like I think the key component here was the iman and the faith, right? That he, excuse me, wanted to develop in people. And based on this, he guided them towards the definite goals of life. So in communication therapy, which was, he would provide, that the sermon, the gathering, he would use a lot of, like khanka, which is more like, that group, you make them sit together, reflect together, think about something together, introspect something together. And he used like a lot of sermons, group, like he thought that sermon was one of the best spiritual group therapy, and the patients uttered again and again what they listened to, because like some key concepts that they really needed to hear or understand, he always tried to help them repeat and understand it in ways. Remaining near to the therapist is important for efficient treatment. This way of treatment applied to those who fully believed in religion. Belief related to purity of thought, uprightness in character, nearness to Allah, and commitment. So all of these were methods through which he helped the patients in terms of interventions. So coming to the conclusion, well, we see that psychology has become an independent discipline now. And as a result of the influences from physiology, which is the biomedical model, psychiatry, positivists, and who succeeded in. So basically, you see all of these influences has actually made it, very successfully to eliminate the metaphysical elements from the natural and human sciences. This process of secularization actually neglected the moral and spiritual phenomena within the man, right? Because I think a man was not understood in that holistic sense, and that entire sense of understanding a human being in a holistic sense, that the body keeps a score, all these, there's a huge movement that's going into the somatic form of understanding, the psychosomatic relationship, that your body and your mind and your soul and the metaphysicalness of the person, all of this is actually making a comeback, alhamdulillah. So due to its grounding in the secular worldview, which was very predominant in the 19th and 20th century, present to today, still still today, psychology cannot be accepted fully by Muslim psychologists. So Muslim psychologists, it is definitely our responsibility to work really hard at the theoretical and practical levels to bring back our own indigenous psychology, to go back and claim the legacy, and to stay in touch with the roots. Because as you see, all of these things is something that you actually see in your clinical practice now. These are suggestions and these are interventions given to you centuries ago. And here you are using it under the pretext of the contemporary secular psychologists. So going back and looking at their work and understanding their work and, revisiting their work and reviving them, right, is what really needs to be the goal of the upcoming Muslim practitioners in psychology, inshallah. So I thought I'll end with a beautiful poem by Imam al-Junayd. It's on Muhabba, the love of Allah. So he says that attached to his Lord through his remembrance, constantly fulfilling his rights, beholding him with his heart, the lights of his majesty awe burnt up his heart, and he subsists only on the nectar of his infinite compassion. The Jabbar had manifested to him his heart through the veils of the unseen. So when he speaks, it is by Allah, and whatever utterances he makes, it is from about Allah. And when he moves, it is by the command of Allah. And when he is still, he is with Allah. And he is by Allah, for Allah, and with Allah. So with that, I would say, Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.
Jazakallah khairan, Sister Zulekha. Subhanallah, there is a wealth of knowledge in our past, and sadly, it is the least studied, I would say, and not glorified at all. And it all goes back to going back to the source, I would say, right? Because there's so much of information that you've given us now in the past more than an hour, and I'm sure there is even, you've just given us like a small peek into it, and there's so much more than what is there. SubhanAllah. And of course, the poem at the end, Sister Zulekha, you definitely need to send it to me, because that poem is just absolutely beautiful. SubhanAllah. Sister Zulekha, Jazakallah khairan kaseera for speaking to our audience today. We are truly grateful to Allah for enabling this session for us with you, and I'm sure the audience also resonates with this. Barakallahu feek. To all our participants, both near and far, your presence has been instrumental in creating an atmosphere of shared learning and support. I would be remiss not to extend heartfelt thanks to our volunteers whose tireless efforts and dedications have brought this conference to life. As the hadith goes of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the stronger believer is better and more beloved to Allah than the weak believer, while there is good in both. So let us leave here strengthened in faith and determined to support one another on our respective journeys towards mental well-being. And now, from the little insight that Sister Zulekha has given us, it has sparked that interest to go and delve into Islamic psychology and see how it so well syncs with what Islam has to say. And psychology need not be seen as something very different from Islam, because at the end of the day, everything and anything that is there in this world has a touch of Islam to it. It's only that we need to see it. May Allah bless us at all times and give us the strength to continue serving our communities with empathy, love, and unwavering faith. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.